Hi, everyone. So I have this sort of like four-part series for our time together. One is I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the idea of portfolio approach to life. Then I'll tee up a little conversation with Liz and I'll tell you why Liz in a little bit. And then we're going to have you talk to each other. So we're going to be a little bit dynamic, see how many people show up. But the idea is to put you in rooms of three and you'll have about 15 minutes together. And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk to each other, lively together. And those of you who don't already, know the community as well, I really hope that you will make yourselves more heard, than those of us who all know each other super well. So welcome for anybody who's new. We're all friends here. We're just figuring out why. So let's just get going. I'm going to share my screen. So I just have a couple of slides, just 3 slides, but they're very dense. I want to talk a little bit about how I think about all of us and sort of framing into the conversation of Liz and then framing into how I want you to talk to each other. And this is how I think about things. We started Athena 10 years ago. And when I say we, I really do mean we. Athena has many mothers, one of which is Liz. And, all of us kind of coming into Athena came to Athena with a traditional ascending a vertical sort of experience of our career worlds. We climbed the ladder, swung through the jungle gym, navigated the lattice, whatever you want to say. But we have been on this traditional sort of ascent. And, kind of represented here, you go from individual contributor to maybe a lead to a manager, a director, a VP, a C-suite leader, a CEO, maybe board. But it's this sort of vertical ascent. And a lot of us coming into Athena come into Athena somewhere in this realm of senior director, VP, SVP, EVP, CXO. And a lot of us, as we're being curious about and led to Athena in some form or fashion, the driving force that gets us thinking about Athena is, well, should I serve on a board? That has been for 10 years something that has been the underpinning of Athena. It used to be all we did was get women onto corporate boards. And now it's a piece of what we do. And what I realized over time was that it was a driving force to something that I feel is much more enriching and bigger, which is kind of this question of what am I going to do in my 50s, 60s, 70s, and maybe even 80s? And so then I started realizing that, corporate boards, executive work, corporate board work is a piece of kind of the richness of how we might sail into the sunset over a course of a much longer time than the generations before us. The generations before us sort of sailed into the sunset in a very abrupt way for the most part. They retired, they called it a day, they had a big retirement party, they left and it was over. And maybe they dabbled in some few things here and there and served on the church vestry board or, joined a couple of nonprofit boards or, did some adjunct professor stuff. But they kind of sailed into the sunset in a very short horizon, expecting just a few years ago, back some 30, 40 years ago to be lucky if they lived past 65, that it was more sort of unusual to live into your 80s. And certainly not mentally healthy, feeling very nervous about the last years of mental and physical health. And so we're sort of stuck with that mental frame. But now what I'm seeing is more and more people coming into this thought about themselves, not just as like I go from executive to corporate boards, but this variety of ways in which I might play in the governance sphere, which could be corporate boards, public, private. It could be ESOPs. Jessica's very experienced in ESOPs. It could be private equity. It could be venture capital. It could be family owned. So there's this whole variety of corporate boards. And then there are, kind of nonprofit boards, and that serves your soul maybe in a different way. Advisory boards, because then you can build kind of a portfolio. It's not the fiduciary responsibility. There's kind of a lot more flexibility in there. But then we also can think about ourselves more as having kind of a multidimensional view of how we describe ourselves because, oh, and by the way, I do also teach at the university. And oh, I also do take some speaking engagements here and there. And I'm writing a book and I'm starting a podcast. And I also do angel investing. And I'm also a limited partner in several, venture firms. And I also do some consulting here and there. I mean, I didn't intend to, but I do. And, and I kind of decided that I'm going to start a company. And I hear that more and more. I've decided I'm going to start a company and I might even raise some money from my friends. And then I'm going to get it from VCs. And then, I thought I would never go back in-house again. I would never want to step my feet into four walls ever again. But then someone talked me into it and I did a fractional CXO role and, or maybe I went from being on a board to back in-house and I'm doing the CEO thing. So there becomes this kind of rich portfolio of the way we can think about ourselves. And it moves from this idea that we are a resume and we define ourselves by the role we currently have today, this sort of singular role. I am the CXO of this company and this industry in this region, to kind of defining ourselves based on something that is more descriptive than that. It's not a title. It's a portfolio. I'm developing my portfolio view of my professional contributions to the world. And it involves these variety of things. And the one I'm most excited about right now is this one. Like I always refer to myself as an entrepreneur. And I say in my next phase, when I'm referring to myself as a specific identity, it will be investor. Like that's, what I'm sort of going for, entrepreneur to investor. But that doesn't mean I don't also do all sorts of other things. So that's kind of what I wanted to tee up in this conversation. And I wanted to kind of get you thinking about it I'm stealing from my friend Christine Heckert, who always has the best illustrations. But she has this concept, there's this concept of tree-shaped leadership. When you're in the traditional corporate world, as an executive, you have to be able to look across the organization in a holistic way and then down into your functional line. But a tree is actually a much better than T way of thinking about both the corporation and yourself. Because in the corporation, what anchors the tree is all of the values and beliefs and the structure and the systems and the strategy and et cetera. And what anchors the canopy, the stronger the roots, the stronger the canopy, is the ecosystem, your partners and your, shareholders and your customers, et cetera. But I would say that same tree follows for the corporate you, or for the professional you, which is to say, we're all brought into this world through our unique set of roots. And that's what I'm showing you here first and foremost. I think about my roots as I think about my next phase, as I think about a portfolio for myself. And when I think about that, I have to, sort of embrace and come to terms with and sort of, maybe even celebrate some of the things that shaped who I am. My mom was the breadwinner. I was a kid of divorced parents. I was a latchkey kid. Money was tight. I visited 47 countries and lived on 3 continents. I was an Ivy League educated kid, but as soon as the schooling was done, I was on my own. And I'm super culturally fluid. I'm very entrepreneurial. I'm hyper independent. I'm self-made. I'm very ambitious. And so it's natural that led me very quickly by the time I was 25 to kind of try as an entrepreneur to skip all the steps. I wanted to skip all the steps and went right to I'm building a company. And I built a company. I didn't build a company. Sorry, I built a product. I talked to literally one VC who said, nice product, kid. Where are the adults? Where's your business plan? Off you go. And so I sold that product to a company early in the HR outsourcing space for $80,000 and licked my wounds and came back in-house. But, it sort of set the stage for me to be an entrepreneur multiple times over. I always have been an entrepreneur, but I didn't realize that. Actually, I lost sight of that for almost 10 years, 17 years in some ways, because I went out and tried to start a business when I was 25. And then I came back in and I was a manager. And then I was a director. And then I was a VP. I mean, I was a VP by this time I was 28. So I rapidly moved through that hierarchy. But I kind of forgot that I was an entrepreneur. And so, I spent all these, sort of most of my 20s and into my early 30s just being on that lattice, jungle gym, whatever you want to call it, and moving as fast as I could with my ambition and independence and entrepreneurial spirit. And it led me to becoming the third owner of a business that had been established for 10 years prior before I became the third owner of it. But it led to me being on a board and being president, COO by the time I was 33 years old, 30, 31, 33, somewhere in there. And that all of this experience led me to, after Taos, still singularly threaded, after Taos, saying, okay, now I'm going to go do consulting, because what else do? I don't know what to do next. So I left Taos behind entirely, fell swoop, gone, and started consulting. And then I started Athena, and Athena became my full thing. But I'm realizing in this realm of portfolio that my work at Taos and my work as a consultant led me to advisory boards and led me to board work. And it's going to be the future that leads me to more consulting and writing and doing, writing a book and starting a podcast and teaching, and my next persona, the investor. And so that's my story. And I want to just stop there and write about where I wanted to be. And I tell you that because I want you to think not like a resume, not necessarily like canned sound bites and elevator pitches and the 30-second elevator pitch and the 3-minute one, and throw all of those things sort of aside and think holistically about yourself and practice that. And more, it becomes more and more enriching when you start to think about that question of, what am I going to do in my 50s, my 60s, my 70s, my 80s? What am I going to do? And so Liz, I want to transition over to Liz, and then we're going to transition to all of you. I met Liz not quite 10 years ago, very early days of Athena. And when I met Liz was a senior partner at Accenture. She was running the biggest partnership, Microsoft, and I think the biggest customer, biggest partnership for Accenture. However she thinks of it, had gone through this many year rise vertical through Accenture. And when I met her, it was through the introduction of another fabulous woman, Yvonne Wassenaar, who said, Liz is thinking about what's going to happen next, and she's exploring board work. Very much that sort of traditional, like, okay, what's next, boards, right? And today, I think Liz is being what I would call a portfolio master. And that sort of started very quickly in my knowledge of you. You started branching very, very quickly. And so I want to ask you sort of first and foremost, Liz, in your own words, tell us about your portfolio. So you've heard how I think about portfolio.
Yeah.
First, how do you define it?
Well, it's hard to follow you, Coco, because that was such an eloquent discussion of the tree. I like that analogy as well. I guess when I decided to leave Accenture, and it was a planned retirement. So, because I'd been there over 30 years, I really had no idea what I was going to do. And I met you and I met Yvonne, and you guys through Athena had really helped me to start thinking about board work and also many other things, speaking as well as other. And I knew I had sort of one priority, which was I needed to prioritize my family. Like when I retired, my number one priority was going to be, I was going to put my family first, always. Whereas before that, they had not always come first, right? Because of work. And so I still had one child in high school, and my husband, my other kids were off. But I sort of looked at my schedule and said, anything that comes in has to be now measured against the time away from my family and what I want to do with them. And I've been able to hold to that pretty well. Occasionally I've had some, I've been on some challenging boards, so that's taken some time. But that's the first thing I did. So I think I thought about my priorities, and whether I had more than that, I don't really know. I knew that was one. I knew my husband and I wanted to do some travel. But other than that, I kind of looked at my time and it was so strange not working. And I always give the example of I went to the mall here. I live in Bellevue, Washington. I went at 2 o'clock on a Monday, like maybe 3 months after I had left working full time. And there was like very few people in there. And I hate to say this, but I was in my head so judgy. I was like looking around at the people, and if you weren't a mom with little kids or a stroller or some old person like, walking the mall for exercise in your Skechers or whatever, I kept thinking to myself, what are you doing in the mall? Like it's 2 o'clock, you should be at work, especially if you're a guy. Like I really gave them the internal stink eye, right? Because I'd never been to the mall at 2. And, I had no idea that there were jobs that had any flexibility and things. So of course, this is pre-pandemic. And then over time, I gave myself some time to kind of think about how to shape the hours. And I knew that I needed to keep my head in the game and keep up with some intellectual stimulation. And I love technology. I'd always had a technology career. So I did pursue board roles. As I was fortunate that I had already secured a spot teaching an adjunct professorship at the University of Washington, which I did while I was still working full time. So if you're thinking about doing something like that, and maybe we could spend a few minutes talking about that, but it's important to try and do it as you still have some brand. And I did that for 9 years. It was not full time. And then interestingly, more stuff kind of came along and I said yes to a lot of different things. And then I kind of pared back. And I think where I'm at now is a good combination of sort of family, travel, board work, just investing. We can talk, I did a fellowship, et cetera, like that. So, and then really trying to think more about my nonprofit work or my sort of how do I give back work as I move forward. So it's evolved, but there's a very, very full plate and it makes me really happy.
So maybe just inventory the full plate for us real quick. Like
what I'm doing. So I stopped. So, since I've retired, I'll tell you what I've done. I've never gone back to a full-time job. I didn't want one. I had a great job. Like I loved my job so much and I got offered a bunch of jobs, but I realized like none of them could compare. And I was fortunate financially that I did not need to go back to work. So that's one. Two, I did not take up any consulting or coaching or anything. I just didn't want to do that, right? But what I did do was I was already on a nonprofit board here in Washington around Washington STEM, which is STEM education. I became the board chair for 3 years. I did get on some boards, some private company boards through Athena to start. And then once I got on one board, it expanded. And then I'm on a public company board. It just actually ended. So I've been on 5 boards at this point. What else? I did a podcast. I started a podcast with Athena called Third Act. And that was really to try and figure out, it was very selfish. It was like, I'm going to interview people who have gone on and done awesome things like in their third act. So I always look at life as sort of your first act is school, your second act is your job, your third act is, sort of what you have after that. And I did that for a few years, particularly during the pandemic. It was fun, but it was a lot of work and it was kind of just me and one other half-time person. So I stopped. I said I was taking a break for 6 months. It's been a couple of years. I may go back to that. I've done a lot of very interesting travel. I've done a lot of adventure travel. And my husband and I have another set of friends who were sort of backed up to the hardest to the easiest as we get older. I've spent a lot of time with my 3 adult kids, helping them, now that when they call, the answer is yes, as opposed to wait till I get home. And then most recently, 2 years ago, or maybe a year and a half ago, I really started to feel like I was not giving back enough to the greater good of the country. And I whether you're religious or not, I always just think like if I have the opportunity to, go to heaven, like, and the Lord says to me, say, you got all these gifts, what did you do with them? That I can have a good answer to that, right? Because I feel like I have been blessed with many gifts. And I didn't think I was doing enough to give back to the country and, lots of things going on. And what can I do? So I found this fellowship program at the University of Chicago. There are similar programs at Stanford and Harvard and Texas and Notre Dame called the Leadership and Society Initiative. And I spent all of last year basically going to school at the University of Chicago, doing a fellowship. And the fellowship was, I had a point of study and it was around trying to expand national public service for young people. So after working with people in college and just listening to sort of their commentary about their feelings on the United States, and I would say they declined over the 9 years I taught, I thought, this isn't right. I need to do something about it. So now what I'm trying to focus my time on, and it's harder because there's no set organizations, it's not like a board or whatever, but I'm working both nationally and with the state of Washington to try and look for ways to get more people involved. And it's a little bit of, it was going great until April and DOGE cut all the funding for AmeriCorps. They brought it back. So it's an interesting political environment, but that's also a really good thing for me as well, because I don't know anything about how to work with members of Congress, et cetera. And I'm learning all of that. And over the next 10 years, if you were to ask me, where do you want to be in 5 years? What I really want is I want to be a recognized sort of national leader around expanding national service for young people. And it's hard. I mean, because it's state-based and everything else, but I got the time, the talent, and the treasure. I need to, it's something I really want to pursue. So that's kind of what I've been doing. And probably a lot of other things that I'm not even thinking about. So
yes. And she's also on the board of Athena Alliance.
And yeah, that's one of my boards.
So maybe talk a little bit, Liz, about sort of the transition of identity.
Yeah.
Did you have any identity crisis at any point?
I knew it would be a problem because just for perspective, I went to Ohio State. I have an aerospace engineering degree. I graduated on Friday and I started working at what was then Arthur Andersen on Monday. So my parents, we packed all my stuff up in their car. We drove from Ohio to Chicago. I started in the Chicago office. So I had like no break, right? And so from 22 to 55, I was at Accenture and I worked my ass off. Like I'm sure all of you do too, but I had very short maternity breaks, all of those, because I'm a little older. So we had there was none of this better stuff now. And I loved it. I really did. And I had a big job, right? I was the senior managing director for our Microsoft account. I was on our global leadership team. And I had a really nice little card. It had a purple chevron for Accenture. I handed that to everybody. It was at the bottom. And the day I left, so my last day was February 28th. And on March 1st, my email was gone and nobody called. It was over, right? Once you're done, you're done. And I knew that would happen because I'd seen some people who were a year or two ahead of me, most all men, and they really suffered. And my husband, he bought me some books on retirement, trying to help me out. And he brought one, some of them were bad, but one is really good. And it's called Younger Next Year. And if you haven't read it, I would recommend reading it. And it really talked mostly about health, but it also talked about change in identity. And so fortunately, I was still teaching at the University of Washington, but it was hard to let Accenture go and also hard not to be senior managing director Accenture. And I had to sort of let it wash over me for about a year. And it took probably 18 months to 2 years before I felt like I wasn't waking up every day thinking about Accenture or or giving somebody a call to see what was going on or any of those things. But now, as I said, I left with no regrets. I'm pleased for all the people there. I see people who work for me who are now on the management team, which is great, right? But it takes some time. And I think for men and women both, and what I read is that it's much harder for men. And I think maybe that's because women tend to have more things going on generally, so they maybe can identify themselves some other way. I'll tell you one funny thing that I knew what happened and it did, which is, I worked with all guys, right? All the people at my level, save 5, maybe in the United States, in my group, were men. And they'd been my best friends. These guys were like my brothers. I'd worked with them for 30 years. I know their families. When I go to San Francisco, I spend the night at some of their houses with their wives and their kids, right? And I said, when I leave, you guys will never call me again. I'll never hear from you. I'll be the one reaching out to you, even though I hear from you like once or twice a week now. You Slack me, you Instagram, whatever. And it's true. I've continued to hear from all my women friends at Accenture, and we get back together, etc. But I never hear from the guys. And I'm not a mom of Bellevue. We moved here in 2011. So my kids were a little older. I never got into the moms groups here. So I knew I'd have to also make some friends, which, in your 50s is a little harder to do. But I managed to do some of that too. And that was hard too, coming from a very male dominated day-to-day chat, chat about our families, chat about whatever. It wasn't just guy stuff. We chatted about everything. And then coming back into where you go to a dinner party or you go to a party with your kids' parents, friends or whatever. And now you're in this women's group as opposed to being in a men's group. And I will say, I think, Coco, I think Athena has helped to bridge a lot of that gap, right? To be able to be a part of that and talk to you and Yvonne and a lot of the women. And we have some pretty decent women's groups up here in Seattle as well. So that's helped. So you got to kind of think about all that. And fortunately, I kind of knew that was coming as well.
That's great. So I was talking to one of our members a couple of months ago who said, by the way, Coco, I just rotated off my last board and I'm now on the other side of all of it. She just turned 80.
Yeah.
And so she said, I'm now on the other side of all of it. I've stopped doing all of this stuff. So I sort of retired. And then I had my whole portfolio career, as you call it, the third act, right? And I did all these things and I served on boards and I did and I said, what are you doing now? And she said, now I'm dedicated to exploring myself. And so she did all these kinds of things, right? So that's a lead into another question for you, and maybe our final one before we let everybody talk to each other, is how do you know when all these things that are the professional you, even the one where you say, I want to be a name in political
national service,
around national service, right? I would still say that loosely speaking, I'm calling that the professional you. It's the part of you, the brain, that's not about travel and hobbies and fun and family. And it's the contribution to something, that you could make money on if you wanted to. It's sort of like professional. When do you know that's all enough? And how do you get there, right? So how are you sort of balancing your portfolio today? Is it cognitive load? Is there financial, like some of it has to provide income for you? Is it impact? And how do you imagine the next wind down?
So when I chose to do the fellowship, I think I was at one of those step points, which is to say that cognitively and intellectually, I was very stimulated. The board work was keeping me busy. The teaching was keeping me busy. But what happened was, again, this sort of like inner voice was just like, this isn't enough. Like, again, you got to go do more to give back. And even though, I was doing some local philanthropic work, it just didn't feel, I felt like all my for-profit and commercial stuff was good and I was making a huge contribution, but I thought I can use the same brain I'm using for all of this and switch it over to sort of leave the United States, the place that I was born into, if not better, right? And I really started feeling strongly about it. And so that's why I made that pivot. The only thing that will take me off of continuing to do all this would be in the near future. So I'd say in the next 20 years would be sort of one of two things, either my or my husband's health, right, would give, or, I have 3 kids. And to be honest with you, the day they have grandchildren is probably the day you want to call me again and say, the day I get a grandkid, I'll probably be on a new pivot, right? Like I'm moving to where they are. So my brother just called me and my nephew got engaged yesterday. So it'll be the first in my family. And I'm like, I'm so jealous because that probably means you're going to have a grandkid soon. But anyway, that will probably change because I've told my kids, I said, we will help you, right? My parents were very helpful, but my mom and dad both worked the whole time. I had kids, we had nannies. I said, if you guys need help, I don't want to be your full-time childcare person, but we'll certainly help. So we'll see. But I don't ever intend, unless my brain goes to mush, to stop. Maybe that will change, but boy, I've got a pretty big plate, ahead for the next 5 years, and I'm pretty excited about it. The pivot to going to the University of Chicago and getting involved in that. And if you're interested in something like that, it was a whole year of school, which was great, but it definitely helped. It was a good way to clear the last sort of 10 years of what I've been doing and make a pivot to something new. And that is also new people, new networks, new things to sort of get more involved in. More difficult for sure. But again, that's something I'm up for the challenge. And I don't know about all of you. I assume you're all the same as you push yourself pretty hard, but you probably all are also balancing, I certainly watch out for my health and I work out and all that other stuff. But if I wasn't waking up every morning going, what am I doing next? what is there to life, right? I mean, there's more to do. And I just feel the need to do it.
I love this. Thank you, Liz.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Thank you to everybody. It's always fun to talk to this group.
Yeah. So here's what we're going to do now. We're going to let you talk to each other. So Marielle's going to break you into groups of 3. You're going to have 15 minutes, so about 5 minutes each. And there's 3 questions. You don't have to answer all 3. It's probably going to be challenging to do so, but make space for all 3 of you. And you're going to explore the same topics we've just been exploring. You'll have 15 minutes. We'll come back. And then our last few minutes, we'll chat amongst each other to hear any new ahas or any, sort of breaking moments or challenges, things that you want to share. Welcome back, everyone. Does anybody have anything they'd love to share?
I would want to start. I mean, I think it was great to be able to articulate some of the things that might have been floating in all of our minds, through those questions. And I wanted to say that I think one thing that resonated with me a lot was your discussion around the career personas. So it's interesting to think about it in that way. And so I've had a very diverse career. And I was telling Emmy, who I was in the room with, I see my career in 3 acts, my nonprofit do good hat in the past, my current corporate executive hat or persona now, and then the persona of being a thought leader and entrepreneur in the next act. So I like the idea of being able to construct a career that fits all of those personas.
Yeah, I love it. Carol, you're being called out by Susan here. She wants you to share.
We were talking about the kind of mental barrier that a lot of people have, and I've heard people mention it. You come out of a corporate career and you need to build a profile. And the kind of standard advice is, post on LinkedIn. You need to post all the time on LinkedIn. And I mean, LinkedIn is full of an awful lot of rubbish as well. But it's how do you get over that barrier? Because you don't do that when you're in corporate, or you do what the company is posting. You participate in marketing activities. So moving to that type of activity, I think it's tricky. It's hard. It's hard. Mentally hard to do. I mean, I think some people here, I'm sure it's like second nature because you got used to it. But I think I hear a lot of people talk about how it's a step to take. So she had some advice on how to do that.
Carol, do you want to share your advice?
Yes, I was empathizing with Susan and Pallavi in our group about, 2-3 years ago, I somehow found myself on this journey of writing and posting on LinkedIn pretty consistently, about 2-3 posts a week. But like Susan, about 2-3 years ago, I was like, what in the what? How the heck would I even write one thing? But I found and been part of this community called DIY by Julie Morris. It's a community and it's been extraordinary in terms of getting very tactical about, how do you even begin? Where do you even begin? What do you write about? And I met her originally through the Chief Network. And she started this community. And my own journey started with a LinkedIn Live event that she was doing. And I went just to support her, not because I was trying to figure out, how do I become a thought leader? I have thoughts. I don't think I'm a leader of those thoughts, but I have thoughts. And she put out a challenge to say, do 50 posts. And I wanted to barf. And she broke it down and saying, just do 1 post a week. And I just kind of just for the fun of it, I just decided, okay, let me see if I can even just do 1 post a week. And I took on that challenge as a personal challenge. And fast forward, 2-3 years, I've had incredible connections, genuine relationships, opportunities that have come my way. Never thought I'd have, over 6,700 followers. That's nothing. I know there are people who have literally millions of people. That was never my goal, but just the fact that, there are folks who are actually reading my stuff. And I was just sharing that, there's a community that makes it really easy peasy, supportive. You learn a lot of things.
Anyone else want to share some thoughts?
I think what Liz shared about her experience of leaving work and the time it took to adjust, it's self, and then to figure out what are the strengths that we want to continue to apply and focus on for later. That introspection itself afterwards, I don't think while we are working, we spend much time thinking about it. And then afterwards, being the person having to market yourself, to think about all of these, like Carol and oversharing, that's a very different skill in itself, I feel. So that's the challenge that we'll have to overcome, and we do set a lot of barriers on ourselves. So it was inspiring to listen to how Liz kind of went through those. Thank you.
Casey, I think you were coming off mute.
It's so interesting how the world works. I mean, Susan and I are both chiefs of staff and ended up together and in a group with so many different kinds of expertise for that to happen. It's pretty cool. So thank you.
That's amazing. I love it. Well, I know we're out of time. We'll do this again. We'll, keep working on these. Annie, our chief customer officer, she launched what was going to be a quarterly member networking, and everybody loved it so much. It's now turning into a monthly thing. So these are places where we can talk about these things and explore them further and realize that we're all more in the same boat than we might realize. And there's a lot we can do to help each other build brand, as Carol was talking about, and recognition and awareness, but also build community where we need it. Thank you so much, Liz. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for doing this. And it's so nice to meet everybody. And if anybody has questions about like the fellowship in particular, because it's a little different, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect.